Well, hello everybody. I'm Hal.
And I'm Melanie.
And we want to welcome you to another episode of Making Biblical Family Life Practical. So we've got 8 kids.
8 kids who we have homeschooled all the way through.
Mm-hmm.
6 of them have graduated. Number 7 is a senior this year.
Yep.
And so
you know what? I remember before we had a lot of kids, and I thought about the possibility of having a big family. I pictured the KinderCare bus. And
that's
then realized,
the way this works.
No,
People don't have
not,
litters, Hal.
We're not Labrador Retrievers, and so we're not going to have 8 2-year-olds or 8 6-year-olds starting school at the same time. So what that kind of meant was they added into our school one at a time, and that meant that there were little ones underfoot.
But,
yeah,
it was different than I imagined.
Mm-hmm.
Because, I remember when I first started school and we had he was really young when he started because he begged me to start.
Right.
And, we had one in school and a toddler and a baby.
Right.
And you think, I can't add any more to this.
Yeah.
But 2 or 3 years later, when you add the next child, it's not that you have more little ones, it's that you've added an older one on top. So
right.
Now you have a second grader and a kindergartner and a toddler and a baby.
So it's kind of like if you started out and you've got a 6, a 4, and a 2-year-old,
yeah.
And then 2 years later, now you've got an 8-year-old and a 6 and a 4 and a 2-year-old.
Yeah, you keep adding kids on top as the older ones get older,
mm-hmm.
and actually it gets easier in many ways because
right.
the older kids help so much.
But you got to make it through the day.
Right, and so one thing I want to talk about is how do you homeschool with babies and toddlers? Because I think I saw a post the other day
mm-hmm.
in one of my groups, and one of the moms said, I'm pregnant, I'm due in October, I have no idea how in the world I'm going to balance homeschooling, first grade, and a preschooler, and a newborn.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, I think that there's some things here that you may be missing.
Yeah.
Because homeschooling a young child does not take very long.
No, and it doesn't have to be super formal and structured like you had a classroom full of other people's children.
Well, I think people imagine, if you've never homeschooled before, all you know is they're doing full-day kindergarten at the school down there. And first graders are in class from 8 in the morning till 4 in the afternoon. What in the world? And you picture that it's going to take that long, but really, homeschooling kindergarten takes about 30 to 45 minutes a day.
Uh-huh.
And it can be broken up into 4 or 5 bites.
Let's just be honest. A lot of the school schedule, particularly in the younger grades, is because it also doubles as childcare.
Yes.
That it's just easier to take your whole family and drop them all off at the bus stop and pick them all up at the same time. And the fact that your high schooler brings home a bag full of homework to do at night, and the fact that your kindergartner really only spent about an hour and a half doing anything academic, and it was play school the rest of the day, that's immaterial. You were just looking to manage your schedule. But,
right.
But if you're doing it at home, your schedule's at home already. And so...
And what they actually need to learn does not take much time at all when you're tutoring a child one-on-one.
Right.
Because if you're teaching a whole classroom, you might have to explain a math problem 5 ways for everybody in the classroom to get it. But if you explain it to your own child, first of all, you're going to understand how they think, and so likely the first way you explain it, they're going to get it.
Right. Mm-hmm.
But if they don't, you can explain it in different ways until they do.
Mm-hmm.
And so sometimes it's going to be just the math you teach your child is going to take you a minute, 1 minute. And other times it might take an hour to help them explain it, to help them understand it.
Yeah.
But it's not going to take an hour every day.
Right.
In fact, it's seldom going to take more than a few minutes.
Right.
And so I think that's the first thing of homeschooling with babies and toddlers, to realize that school is not as time demanding as we think.
Yeah.
So if you are using a curriculum that is used that was developed for classroom use, you may want to go find one that was developed for homeschoolers, because curricula developed for classroom use for young children has way too much work. It has tons of busy work because they're trying to keep those kids busy.
And they assume that the teacher doesn't have the time or the mental latitude to edit on her own. You know,
Right.
and so there's a lot of material in there that they can choose from, but yeah, I mean,
And they're assuming that the teacher is going to say, okay, do
mm-hmm.
3 problems on this sheet. But most homeschoolers don't have, especially when you're starting out, don't have the confidence to do that. Yeah. And so they assign every one of the sheets until their kids are completely burned out. And so
right.
Get a curricula that was designed for homeschoolers. That has a lot less busy work, has little to no busy work.
Right.
Kids don't need it. All it does is burn them out. And the actual, what they actually need, very, very brief. So that's the first thing.
Okay.
I think the second thing about homeschooling with babies and toddlers is to realize that our home does not need to look or feel like a classroom either. That learning to get interrupted and to go back to what you were doing is a life skill, especially these days with our phones going gadong.
Well, and so many of us working from home are being interrupted by the same things that our students are being interrupted with when the baby cries or the toddler makes a noise or whatever. You know, we all just have to learn to live with this kind of thing, right?
Yeah, so what do you do if your toddler needs attention and you're in the middle of the lesson? You say, excuse me, wait a second, and you go deal with the toddler. Or you turn your book around and say, keep reading from here, and you go back and you deal with the toddler.
That is such an important principle because toddlers have a very short attention span for everything except whining.
Yes, they can whine all day long.
And so if the toddler comes up and it's like, mama, 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 you can turn and give that toddler 90 seconds of your time and top off his battery, and he's good to go.
But if you put him off and you're like, hold on, Mama's teaching history, hold on, Mama's teaching math, it'll get louder and worse and worse and worse until they've been whining for 45 minutes and it takes 45 minutes to calm them down.
Right. And so early attention is the shortest attention, right?
Absolutely.
That's really just the thing. And just what you said, let your student coast for a minute. Give them direction and say, here, what would you do with that toddler? How would you entertain that toddler during school? I mean,
well, for one thing, have some toys they can play with during school, and only during school is a help. Because then they're excited to play with those things that aren't always available. Oh,
like toys that don't have batteries and noisemakers in them?
Things that don't make noise.
Yeah, just for school.
Also, some toddler school things, like crayons and paper and art supplies.
Picture books.
And glue sticks that they can sit in the floor and do some, quote, school of their own.
Right.
They love that. One thing that we would do is I would just say, you want to do some toddler school? Come here. And I'd get them off my lap and I would count their toes with them or sing the ABC song or teach them a rhyme or teach them a Bible verse. And in, less than 2 minutes, they'd be done and gone.
Yeah.
But they learned a lot during those little times we spent together. And they just come check in every once in a while.
I tell you, that was one thing that really impressed me and surprised me as we were starting our homeschooling journey was how much the younger kids were overhearing and learning without apparently even paying attention.
Yeah.
I mean, even things like we were teaching Latin to our oldest one at one point, and his younger brother, who hadn't even learned to read yet, was memorizing the endings because we were chanting them over and over with his older brother, and so
and that's been true of everything.
Yeah.
In fact, I feel like our youngest, our 8th, a lot of things I didn't have to teach her because she heard it so many times growing up. And so I'd sit down and say, let's talk about this. And she'd tell me. And I'd say, okay, well, we're done with that.
I bet that happened in Laura Ingalls Wilder's schoolroom when she was a student and when she was a teacher. The younger ones were probably learning in spite of themselves.
Yeah.
When the older ones did their lessons.
Hearing the older ones do their recitations. And by the time you've heard it 3 or 4 times, you've got it.
Mm-hmm. Well, look, let's talk about some more practical ideas here. But we need to take a moment to hear from our sponsor. Join us on the other side, and we'll be right back.
Okay.
Are you looking for a new math curriculum? Well, CTC Math specializes in providing online video tutorials that take a multi-sensory approach to learning. Favorably reviewed in Kathy Duffy's 102 Top Picks and the Old Schoolhouse Crew Review. The lessons are short and concise to help your children break down concepts and appreciate math in a whole new way. The lessons are taught the traditional way, not to the test. Each one of the video tutorials is taught by an internationally acclaimed teacher, Pat Murray, who is renowned for teaching math concepts in a simple, easy-to-understand way and in only a few minutes at a time. Using a multi-sensory approach, having the combination of effective graphics and animation synchronized with the voice of a friendly teacher together with practical assessment, even students who struggled with math are getting fantastic results. And the ones that were doing okay before now are doing brilliantly. Visit CTC Math today and start your free trial. That's ctcmath.com.
Okay, we're talking about the joys and challenges of homeschooling when you still have toddlers and babies. And you know what? You haven't mentioned the babies much. Actually, most of the time, I thought the babies were easier to manage.
Okay, that is because we just wrapped the babies into our schedule. You'll get advice from people that say, oh, you need to get your baby on a schedule and you need to do things in this precise order. And listen to an experienced parent. That stuff just stresses you out and annoys the baby.
A lot of times that's training the parent, not training the baby.
Well, it is, because they say it's to avoid having a child-centered home, but really it makes the whole family dance attendance on the baby's schedule. That's a far more child-centered home than what we did, which is just wrap the baby up into whatever we're doing. If we went on a field trip, I tucked the baby in a sling and off we went. If we were doing school and the baby needs to nurse, I nursed the baby while we were doing school.
Well, that's literally wrapping them up. And I think that's an important thing to point out, particularly if we're talking to a new homeschooling family. We were never the kitchen table type of homeschoolers. We've never been the kind to gather up and put everybody at the table like they were doing a tutorial for an Oxford prep class or something.
No, we're living room homeschoolers.
And that meant that there were kids on the floor and kids on the couch and kids on the couch with their feet in the air and the baby in mom's arms. And
remember, we had 6 boys first.
Right. And mom often sitting with her feet up and nursing the baby or holding the sleeping baby. And
now, I've had a lot of questions about that, Hal.
Yeah?
A lot of moms are, particularly moms of boys, are concerned about whether it's okay to nurse in front of their sons. And I think absolutely so. Now, should you be reasonably discreet? Yes.
Yeah.
Always unbutton from the bottom up, not the top down. Always lift your shirt, don't pull it down.
Yeah.
But I think that it sends a very powerful message to our kids about how babies are a blessing, they're a part of our home, how we take care of them. I was really impressed with when one of our boys had our first grandchild, to see how comfortable he was with that baby and with his wife nursing. And he knew so much about it because he was like third in our family. He'd seen me taking care of a lot of babies after him.
Yeah.
And so he felt very confident about how to be a dad. And, confident in helping his wife and what she needed.
Right.
And so I think that just living life with your baby and your children surrounding you is the way it's always been done. You realize for a long time, most people did not have multiple rooms that they could go to another room to nurse the baby.
Yeah.
And they had one room and that's where everything happened. And so I don't think you should feel awkward at all about nursing in front of your kids. It's a normal part of life that I think it does them good to see. Don't you, Hal?
I totally agree. And the fact is, if a mom has figured out how to nurse in public in a discreet fashion, she can do the same kind of thing at home. I mean, it's not something to be ashamed of. It's not something that is any sort of exhibition or anything. It's just a matter of taking care of the child.
Natural life.
It's natural life, and that makes it so much easier.
Well, babies are super easy to take care of when you just wrap them into life.
Right.
Get yourself a good recliner or rocking chair next to where you want to do school with the kids. And the baby can nurse or or be in your arms for much of the day.
Yep.
While you're doing school, and baby doesn't care.
You know what? Something related to that. The strategic use of nap time.
Oh, yeah.
That's an important thing. And every parent realizes that nap time is a gift to the parents. It's not just the needs of the child.
Well, and so how can we use it strategically? Well, for one thing, sometimes mama needs a nap too.
Yeah.
And for many years, we had nap time or quiet time in the afternoon when we were home.
Right.
Where I laid down with the baby and toddler, and the other kids had to get in their rooms and be quiet.
Mm-hmm.
And you didn't interrupt me unless you were bleeding, and I mean really bleeding.
Yeah.
Because I needed, and if I just took a 20-minute nap with the kids, first of all, they got to sleep a lot easier because it's really hard to stay awake when somebody's sleeping with their arms across you.
Right.
They got to sleep a lot easier, but then I would wake up refreshed.
Yeah.
Even with a 20-minute nap. And then I could go down and spend some special time with the child who needed special help.
Right.
Or work on something that needed to be worked on that I couldn't focus on with the other kids or when the little kids around.
Mm-hmm.
It's a refreshment time for everybody.
And I know particularly with the ones that were older, the ones that are past their elementary years, they discovered that if they knew what they needed to do next in their math or their reading or whatever, that they could come downstairs and do that in the morning before the little ones got up.
Yeah.
And they could do it without distraction. And, that's something that they figured out on their own.
Oh, yes.
So
now it makes their younger siblings hate them. When they come in and say, "Why are you reading a book? You're supposed to be doing school." "Oh, I'm done with my school."
Yeah.
But it's a good example.
It's a good example. But yeah, they all figured that out on their own. So that's an important thing. Again, recognizing just the rhythms of life in your family and the dynamics. And that's an important thing to recognize, just like your homeschool doesn't need to look like anybody else's.
Now, that is a very important point, Hal, because I think what stresses moms out when they have babies and toddlers is they worry about doing all the written work.
Yeah.
And they think we're getting behind and we've got so many worksheets and we can't catch up. And I think, first of all, you need to realize nobody's ever going to look at that stuff.
No.
And so don't do it unless it's providing educational value.
Right.
Now, sometimes they need to do some written work. But a lot of times, the written work is not as critical. For example, if you miss a day because you go on a field trip, don't freak out the next day saying, "Oh no, we've got to do 2 whole math worksheets or my child's never going to get into college." No, instead, go over both math concepts and do practice on both math concepts and maybe skip the worksheet. It will not hurt your kids. I needed to hear that.
Yeah.
I was so afraid that my kids would miss something if we skipped a worksheet now and then.
Right.
But the curriculum designers assume that you're doing that because most teachers do not have them do a full practice lesson, and lesson every single day.
Right.
And so
they don't assign 30 problems. They typically would do every other one or
some days give homework, some days not give homework.
Right.
And so I think we need to give ourselves grace and to realize that a lot of the things that are stressing us out are really unnecessary. Because, I remember doing so much written science stuff, and with later children I realized, I'm just creating documents nobody's ever going to see again.
Yeah.
And we can listen to the science, and we can read it out loud, we can do some hands-on projects, and they remember it just as well.
And that also sort of plays into a related issue, homeschooling a bunch of different levels at once, that there are some things that are just as effective to have everybody doing the same stuff. Everybody let's sit down and we're going to read the history together. We're going to sit down, we're going to read this story together. And everybody hears it. The 2nd grader hears it. The 7th grader hears it. And that's okay. You can ask them different questions maybe. But you don't have to teach 4 hours for each individual child and take a day and a half every day. But rather say, fold them all in together. And when they can do the same thing at the same time, do it that way.
Yeah, combine it. And in fact, that will help your learning. Because when everybody's doing the same thing, they begin to talk about it and discuss it. and look for other books and bring in different ideas. And, both in history and science, that has worked so well in our family when we're all studying the same thing, or at least everybody under high school, because the high schoolers can do their own thing.
Right.
Then it becomes a culture of learning where everybody is talking about it. Well, we're getting to the end of our time, and people are coming home, and our dogs are losing it. And so, Hal?
Yes.
Relax. I think when you tell these moms, relax. It's not as hard as you think.
Right.
Don't do a bunch of busy work if it's stressing you out. Do what really matters for learning. And just wrap those babies and toddlers right up into what you're doing.
That's right. Because we can do it. We can vouch for it. We have done it, and it's worked fine. So enjoy them. Enjoy all of them. And enjoy your homeschooling journey. Okay? So look, we appreciate you being with us. Until next time. Oh, you have something to share?
I have something.
What's that?
I will give them a freebie.
Yes.
If they'll go to the show notes page at halmelanie.com/radio and just scroll down till you see this. Mm-hmm. There's a freebie on homeschooling young children, and I think you're going to love it.
Ooh, excellent. And we'll have some other links on the show page there. That's hallandmelanie.com/radio. Well, look, we thank you for joining us, and we look forward to talking with you again later. And until then, I'm Hal.
And I'm Melanie.
Bye-bye now.
Bye, y'all.
You've been listening to Making Biblical Family Life Practical with Hal and Melanie Young. If you found this program interesting, challenging, and encouraging, why not join us on the web at hallandmelanie.com. That's HALANDMELANIE.com. Or follow us on social media. You can find us on Facebook at Facebook/HalAndMelanie or Facebook.com/RaisingRealMen. This program is a production of the Ultimate Homeschool Radio Network. Join us next week when we'll be back to talk about making biblical family life practical. Until then, thank you and God bless you for listening.